mini speaker of the day, Peter Yates. Peter started flying. Did you start at the Aero Club, Peter? How about you come up and help me out? Did you start flying at the Aero Club?
In Kalgoorlie.
In Kalgoorlie, that's right, yes. And you've got that bloke Neil Reardon here too, haven't you?
My instructor.
Yes, there he is. Welcome, Peter. And Peter's spoken to us before. He flew the Mustang for Bill Wiley, and he also flew for Cathay. I was actually coming back from Hong Kong one time, and I asked for a look over the sharp end, and Peter happened to be the skipper, and he said, "I'll show you a few things, but how about you come up and sit in for the landing?" So I did, and I thought I was very privileged. Thank you, Peter. He's going to tell us about flying for fun.
Well, we took the words out of my mouth about instructors, just like Kenny Pittman here blamed me once for being his instructor, and Neil's down the back. He was my instructor back in 1960. And I can't say 60 years since solo, but it'll be 48 at the end of this, or towards the end of the year. And 48 years of flying basically for fun. A bunch of years in the Air Force and about 25 years in the airlines, which gave me the opportunity of moving around the world and being involved with the Warbirds for about 20 years, and that has been quite good. Just, he's asked me to talk about, Brian said talking about the Changs, but we'll just roll on a little bit with this. Yeah, if you would, please, Brian, just move it on. Previous shot was just what we call the toy shed down the strip a little bit, where some of the collection was, but the Wiley collection, which is depicted here, also included a Texan, and sadly with Bill's sickness, prior to his death, the family decided that the collection had to go. So the Mustang up there is now located in the east. The Albatross was sold, had a bit of a sad ending, and was declared unserviceable, came back in bits, and sat here for a while, dormant in a storage facility, and now that's gone back east and is being restored back to flying condition. The Texan is currently in Sydney. So that did give us a lot of fun flying these ships. We'll just go on the next one, please, Brian. Again, completing the picture of flying for fun. The Fouga is the aircraft that supports the Changs here, which we'll talk about shortly. And these pictures were taken on the way to Kundanan a few years ago. And the gentleman at the top who insists on flying upside down is that famous Yogurtus Carries, a Latvian gentleman who builds and designs his own aeroplanes now and spends most of his life upside down or with lots of negative G on. So also depicting the flying for fun. The Fouga, just mentioned that, the Fighter Combat International, who looks after the Changs and flies them, they've actually got two of them. They're both here on the field at Jandakot, but currently under the experimental tag, so we can't use them commercially for the adventure flights. But hopefully that'll come to fruition before the end of the year, then they can go on the line, and for those that wish to, can be included for the adventure type of flights. And what do we move on? More flying for fun. The Nanchang there in company with the Pitts, that was a Super Pitts, and Warren Reynolds' Laser, which is a single seat aircraft. He calls it the Joker, and it carries the rego of Juliet Kilo Romeo, a bit of a fun ship that he imported from Africa. And the Chang down in the bottom. Okay, we move into the Fighter Combat International. That shot's just taken out over Warnbro Sound, which we call our playground, and typical where we go out in formation. And if we can just get the next shot, I think it's the rolling one, taken from the back seat, and I guess not concluding, but just upside down, but depicting the flying for fun. There are 4 Nanchangs here, of which one of them is on extended maintenance, so we're currently flying the 3, and that's typical, the Nanchang's taxiing up for takeoff.
What were they used for?
Fighter trainers, Chinese. I'll come back to that all in a minute when we start talking about the whole lot. Can we just go one more slide? Okay, some promo shots that we did just down off the bottom of Coburn Sound and Warnbro Sound, and these shots were taken from the Channel 7 helicopter. Just There's some figures that will follow up, but just before we get onto that, just talking about the Changs as such, as the gentleman just asked, you know, Chinese fighter trainers, very good aeroplane for the type of operation that we do, and all of this Fighter Combat International, the adventure flights that we sell and fly, very much modelled on an Air Force type of a mission, whereby the paying passengers come in, and once we're all introduced, they're dressed up in their suits to give them the Top Gun look. They go through a formal, about 20 to 25 minute briefing, just the same as people in the Air Force. Most of the people who fly the aircraft are either current Air Force guys. It seems strange that they fly the Hawks and PC-9s during the week, and they come down to Jandakot to fly these 25-year-old aircraft. But that's their want. And and the other people who aren't current Air Force, like myself, are ex-Air Force. So we've modelled all of our operations on the Air Force rules, even to the extent that when we take off side by side, if the wind's over 10 knots of crosswind, we then do stream takeoffs, whereas if it's under the 10, yes, we can do pairs, takeoffs and landings. The aircraft, as I said, they're still using this type of aircraft in China, but what the Chinese were doing, when the aircraft was about 4,000 hours old, and why they picked that figure I don't know, the aircraft were refurbished, put back in a giant warehouse, and basically just left there, and they started using their new ones, and that's just how they roll them over. Somebody about a dozen years or so back found out about these and considered that they were a good commercial prospect, and the first ones went to the US. I don't know the exact current numbers, but the last ones I did have, there were just over 300 in the US, which I think includes some in Canada. There's about a dozen now in Australia, maybe a little bit more, several in New Zealand, and obviously some in Europe and the UK. But the US is the leader, and as I say, we've got about a dozen or so in Australia. Even though they're refurbished, they're still painted in their drab colours, and they do look a bit drab. And the current wish of the fighter combat directors is to paint them in a semi-gloss paint, just to give them a little bit more, a better appearance. It's a conventional, just talking about the aircraft for a little bit before we come to the questions, it is a conventional nose gear, retractable, undercarriage, constant speed type aircraft. They are very nice to fly. A couple of little things about them. Like a lot of Eastern Bloc countries, they use air systems to operate 4 things on the aircraft. The first one, obviously, they have to start it, and it's started with air pressure. And instead of driving a starter motor, the air pressure is actually gone through a little distributor, and it puts the air straight on top of the piston. So when you see them start, you think, oh boy, that looks like it's got a flat battery type situation, because the propeller turns over very slowly. But as it turns over through that compression stroke, and with boosted ignition, they fire up every time if you've got them primed correctly. So the air used for starting, used for braking, and also pulls the undercarriage up and down and operates the flaps. Has an air bottle storage system on board and a little compressor driven by the engine to resupply the bottle. The canopy, a bit unusual in as much as these aircraft can be flown with the canopy fully open, but when it is fully open we try and warn our passengers. There is one there, I haven't got the little pointer, but this aircraft here is flying with the canopy fully open. The only risk with that is if you get your head even about an inch or so away from the centre, you run a very severe risk of losing sunglasses, caps and headsets. So there is an intermediate position we fly with the canopy open a few inches. It can be flown, say, with the canopy fully open. The controls are unusual in the aircraft in as much as when you sit in and just like pilots pretending to be flying, you sit down and take hold of the control column and start moving it. The control column is absolutely silky, and you would sort of swear if you didn't look outside that the controls weren't connected to anything externally, but they are. They have a very nice control system. Just going on from that, the engineering of the aircraft, a lot of it is Chinese design, but again, with very much a marrying from a Yak-18, the Russian aircraft, and obviously with some of their own differences. A typical flight that we do in Fighter Combat International, after the briefing, the passengers inserted in the back, sorted out with some of the onboard equipment and how to get in and out, and how some of the things work. And then most of the flights will go out in formation. We fly down to Warnborough Sound, and then once we're out in the Sound, the element of the formation is split up into individual aircraft where the passengers introduced to sport aerobatics, virtually no negative G, and just very conventional sport aerobatics, which it is very nice at, because one of the things with this aircraft, even though it doesn't have a lot of horsepower, it doesn't lose altitude. So if you sort of start at 3,000, and whatever you do, you finish up at 3,000, which is rather nice. The aircraft, then we come back into a combat situation where one aircraft will go into a mock attack on the other, slightly choreographed, but the competitive edge of all the drivers comes into play, and so most people still try to beat the other one. That invariably becomes a stalemate. We try and limit the G to about 4 during those manoeuvres, because even though the aircraft will go more and most of the pilots will go a little bit more than that, most passengers would start to doze off after about 4G. So 4G is a comfortable ride. As we say to our passengers, we want you here for gain, not for pain. Going on, the engine, I wish it was bigger, but 285 horsepower, air-cooled, very reliable, touch wood. And as you can see with the shutters on the front, or what looks like the louvers behind the propeller, it's just what they are. They are mechanical shutters controlled by a handle in the cockpit, and so we can control all the cylinder head temps with those shutters, and they are very, very effective. And that's about, I think, all we need to say. After the combat bit, we do the fighting such, we do actually then introduce the passengers to a little bit of combat trail, which is about 100 metres apart, where we do some aerobatic manoeuvres in this loose formation. And then we close it up and bring them home and hopefully do the pairs landing. When we get home, we invite the passengers to write in a lines book, which is what we used to do at Pierce when students made monumental statements. You had to share it with your fellow instructors. So we asked the passengers to share their experiences with us in a lines book. And we've had some beauties, but one of them always comes to mind quickly was an Irishman who said it was better than Guinness. We've had some others too, but they might be censorable, so I keep my mouth shut. There's another slide there that's got some information on the Changs, just the technicals. There's always those that want to know how wide it is and everything, and I need to see those figures myself. But one thing I will mention about it, it doesn't carry a lot of fuel with only 155 litres, whereas the Yak obviously carries a lot more. And we understand that the reason it only carried 155 litres was to stop any prospective Chinese trainees doing a bunk across the old Straits of Taiwan. It wouldn't make it without running out of fuel. And last but not least, do we have any questions? Because I was asked to speak for 15 minutes, and I think we must be getting close. One down the back for starters.
How many cylinders?
9. All air-cooled. It's an air-cooled radial engine, and all radials are an odd number. So you often see them like the multi-row engines are usually like 7, 14, etc. But the just a single row's mostly 9 cylinders.
Is it copied from a Western engine like some of the old...
With all Eastern Bloc countries, that question always comes up. It doesn't matter whether it's a jet or not. When Brian had the picture of the Antonov 225 on, they have a very marked similarity to a Rolls-Royce engine. So I don't know exactly if there was any... some of the components look awfully similar to Pratt radials, but they do have their own.
With the rotary engines, do you get a thing called hydraulic lock?
Yes, we do, and that's part of the deal every morning, that the blades have to be pulled through to make sure that they're not hydraulic locking. And they also have a little, what we call a snot valve on them. It's just typical, it's a little air oil separator, and when we come back, you just give that a couple of seconds in the open position, and it spits out any of the oil that's the snot that's been separated out of the system. Because with the cooling of the oil, you invariably get a bit of froth, and that froth sort of melts into a bit of condensate. Anybody else? Yeah, Charlie? The question was asked, do the passengers do any flying? With Casa not in the room, the answer is yes. No. The rules are that they can if they are licensed, even from a student licence upwards. So what happens is in the formation and all the combat, obviously the passenger just doesn't have, he's not in the hunt then. But when we go out and when we sort of split up and operate individually, yes, if the passenger shows any inclination and with that little bit of paper, which we don't have asked to see, yes, we give them a go. Yeah.
What's the ground steering like with that compressed air brake?
When you first start, in a word, bloody awful. And then it's like everything else in life. You know, after a few goes, you get used to it. To answer the question is how are they steered? There's no tie-up between anything in the cockpit and the steering on the ground except differential brake. So it's all air brakes, which is like a bike handle on the control column. Again, that's something they would have copied from some of the early English aeroplanes. And then the rudder pedal itself is used to put a bias on whichever way you want to go. And that's why if you see them taxiing out, invariably you'll see the rudder panel at the back invariably going left, right, because that's where the brake bias is being applied. In terms of dollars and cents, yeah, I don't know the exact figure, Brian, but in the order of, I think it's just gone up a little bit because of our rising fuel prices and everything. I think it's in the low 500s. It's 500 and a few bucks for a single booking. But what happens is that because we're already nearly always operating as a pair or the threesome and then four when we get them all going, if people book more than one, the rate comes down. So there's a discount. Like obviously, I think it's in the low 400s if you book the whole four, that being 400 each or something. But to round the numbers off, I think it's in the low 500s, which buys you the full 30 minutes in the air, and we seem to average 33 to 35 minutes in the air, and the person is actually sitting in the aircraft for about 45 to 50 minutes. Anybody else? Chang, so the next time you see them taxiing out, you'll know a little bit more about them. Cheers, guys.